Hello, Carrera modders. Today we're going to continue the story about these analog cars that I've converted to digital, and I'm putting lights in them. These were some evolution cars, 1/32 scale, that I got used in the set. And so obviously they're evolution cars, they're not digital, and they're the older model, so they don't have headlights either. If you saw my or they don't have lights at all. So if you saw my previous video about installing headlights into this car here, you'll notice that I mentioned some things about it that I could have done a little bit better, or could have done a little bit easier. And so we're going to do that on this white one now. And I've gathered all my parts. Hopefully I have my parts and tools and everything here in front of me ready to go. And so I'm hoping I can do all of this on camera and show you basically just how easy this really is. So first of all, we're going to go over a list of the tools that you're going to need. You need a tiny little Phillips head screwdriver, the size that fits the screws on your chassis here to remove your chassis. Need some wire cutters and wire strippers. The wires are pretty small, so that's why I use these real fine ones right here. They're probably not even designed for cutting wire, but they work fine on those tiny little wires. And then a set of smaller wire strippers like these, something along that line will help. You also could use a lighter, because the little wires that are coming off the circuit board are so small that I haven't ever found a wire stripper that'll actually strip them. You can sometimes you can strip them with your fingernail, or just melt them a little bit with the lighter first, and then you can pull it off with your fingernail. Then you also need a hot glue gun and a soldering iron. I would suggest you need kind of the lower wattage, smaller tip soldering iron. You don't need anything big and intense. The one that I'm using is actually slightly too large for this job, but because I am what I am, I'm using this one because that's what I have handy. And it is a 23 water, but the tip's pretty large and it's really, really worn out. But it'll work for this job. Not that big of a deal. Also got a little glue gun, hot glue gun, for gluing the bulbs into the body and for gluing the bulbs onto the chassis. And this one is kind of this little mini style, but it's actually dual heat, which is handy. And a little helping hand here that's got a looking glass here on it, as well as a couple of clips for helping to hold the wires. That will come in handy. And you need a little bit of solder, electrical solder. Also helps if you've got some, well, we don't need that. You've got some wire shrink wrap. And I've got a few pieces here I already cut to length as the size that I need. And as far as materials, of course, you need your Evolution car, which has been shipped now, so it's actually a digital car. And you're going to need some LEDs. And as I mentioned in the previous video, these LEDs, hard time getting in the camera. Okay, these LEDs here are, I found a pretty decent place to buy them on eBay, where they're not really expensive, and it's certainly less expensive than going through the Carrera replacement parts shop. So this works pretty well. And I've got the white ones here. I already used one pair in the red car, as I showed earlier. And we're going to use that pair, the leftover pair here. And then I've got 4 red ones, which I'm going to use between these two cars. So we're going to use a pair of them in this car and then go back to that other car and put in its taillights too. But there we go, we're ready to get started. So we start by removing the screws from the chassis. So we're going to pull these 4 screws out here. 4 screws that hold it on. And I don't have one of those magnetic deals, so I just use like a little cup or In this case, you can see I'm using a little top from a spray bottle. I just drop my screws in there. These will probably get stuck on the magnet. If they don't, they'll drop in there, hopefully. Yeah. And pay no attention to my broken screwdriver. I tried to glue it back together with some of that UV glue, and it seemed like it was going to work, but it gave out. Alright, so now we're going to pull the chassis apart. This one kind of slips into the back and then lays down on the front, so you have to pull the front out first. And see what we got here. So it's just like the previous car. Everything is the same, and that's actually going to make it really, really easy. And as I had mentioned before, the fact that this connector here is for the tail lights. These two connectors here are for headlights. But the interesting thing is they're the opposite connectors. They can actually be connected together. So, in my typical scrounging fashion, I'm going to make use of that. First thing we're going to do is we're going to cut off this connector to the taillights. I'm going to start with the taillights here today. I want to leave enough wire so that I can reuse the connector and still have enough wire to solder to onto the circuit board. So there you go. That's not a whole lot, but that should be enough for me to solder to. I'm going to put that over here in my little cup. Now here's where the lighter comes in handy, because these two wires are just tiny, and if you try to grab it with your fingernail and strip it, you may actually pull it off the doggone circuit board if you're not holding it solid enough. So this is how I do it. I'm going to take a lighter and just kind of melt this insulation a little bit, soften it up. Then I'm going to grab it and pull it off. And you know, you may need to do that a couple of times to get off as much as you want. And then kids, be sure to ask your parents' permission before you do something like this with a lighter. There we go. So now I've got enough of this insulation removed here, and hopefully I've done it carefully enough that I didn't break it off the circuit board or anything. So there we go. Now we're going to start with the red LEDs at the back, as I mentioned before. Let's grab a couple of these out of the pack. They give you some nice long leads on these, like, you know, way too long for my purposes here. So we're going to cut some of that off once we figure it out. And I'm sorry folks, there's a storm moving through here and my storm warning is going off. I'm going to have to put a little stop to the recording here and go turn off the weather radio.